This is the recording of that lesson. Why don't you take a moment and can you evaluate all of these equations or expressions? I guess they're equations because they put equal sign. What is each equation equal to? I guess I have equations, so we call them equations. This is the recording. I normally call people up, ask them why. So first I'd ask, does anyone know what these two lines mean in math? We created these two lines represent an operation. Does anyone know what these lines tell us to do? And normally everyone, or half the class remembers, it's called absolute value. Absolute value. So what, and then we say, what is the absolute value of 4? And a student would say 4, and I would say y. And we'd have a couple different answers because whatever comes out of absolute value is positive, or because this is the distance the number or the integer is away, we'll say number, is away from 0. That's what it asks you. We created a symbol, gave it a name, absolute value, and if we're asking, absolute value is the distance that the number is away from 0. So how far is 4 away from 0? It's 4. Okay. I don't know if you did this, but you can still have operations. What's the absolute value of 1 minus 3? And people always kind of disagree. But did you know that absolute value is also a grouping symbol? Just like parentheses. That's why we don't say PEMDAS technically, because it really should be GEMDAS, grouping symbols, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So it says to do the group, what's in the grouping symbol. So you have to do 1 minus 3 is negative 2. And the absolute value of negative 2, well, how far is negative 2 from 0 is what it's asking us. And the answer is 2. Sweet. All right, and this last one, which maybe now you've got a sense of how to do it. We're going to follow those operations. I'm going to change this to addition, adding the opposite. So we get 6 plus negative 15. It's absolute value. 6 plus negative 15 is negative 9. And so the square root of negative 9 is 9. And I would ask, are there any questions? And so everyone should be okay with it being negative 9. You're at negative 15 and you add 6, so you're going to go up to negative 9. Awesome. Okay. I would take any questions you have for homework normally, but we're going to keep going with the lesson. So, why did I bring up absolute value? Because one of our last thing with equations in chapter 1 is solving absolute value equations. So, we're going to start talking about solving absolute values equations today. So, what we're going to have to do is find the numbers that make this true. Can someone read that for me? Sure, I can. 3 times the absolute value of x plus 4 equals 10. Great. And we're going to solve it. So solving's all about just finding what makes it true. So what number works here, right? Can anyone think of one that works? Maybe, maybe not, right? Okay. So we got a couple thinking, right? So, do we know how to undo addition? What undoes addition, right? Well, that would be subtraction, right? How do you undo this times 3? The answer to that is right. So how do we, and the big question is, how do you undo absolute value. Anyone know what operation undoes absolute value? Okay, we're going to try to figure that out today. How do we solve this? How do we undo absolute value? Okay, so to get our minds thinking about it, let's take a look at some a simpler example. We're going to solve this, right? And the same thing that's solving is finding the values or value that makes the equation true. So write this one down. The absolute value of x equals 10. Does anyone know what we could put in for x that makes that true? What number we could put in? Whose absolute value equals 10? Someone says 10. 10. Is that you thinking? Sweet. It is 10. Awesome. Anything else besides 10? You're like, no, nothing. And then someone always says, raise their hand, then I wait for a couple people. Let's feel like, what else? Something else could be. X couldn't just be 10, it could be something else. What else? And then someone always yells out without asking, negative 10. I'd be like, wow, negative 10. Why does negative 10 also work? Because the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. Negative 10 is 10 away from 0. So that's interesting. So we actually have two answers here. That's really cool. All right. Does anyone know how to undo absolute value yet? Not yet. But we can see that they get two answers, right? We do have two answers. Okay. B. The absolute value of x equals negative 8. Can anyone think of a number that we could put into here that would make it true? Someone quickly yells out 8 normally. 8? Well, would 8 work? Does the absolute value of 8 equal negative 8? No, the absolute value of 8 is 8, so this doesn't work. And then someone says, oh yeah, negative 8. And so I'd be like, oh yeah, great. The absolute value of negative 8 is negative 8. And then everyone's like, no, that doesn't work. It's 8. And then someone would say, well, just put a negative sign outside the absolute value. And then that would work. And that would be great. But then I would say you have to do it on both sides. Right? You put negative on both sides. You can't just do something to one side in an equation. So that's not going to work. Okay. So what number can we put in here? And the actual answer is, which we've seen in this thing, that x actually has no solution. Why doesn't x have a number that makes it true here? And I would take an answer from a student. Why doesn't x have a number that makes this equation true? And normally someone eventually says because the absolute value of a number is positive, right? It has to be positive. So the absolute value of a number is positive, so there is no absolute value, no real absolute value, right? Nothing works. Okay, so do we know how to undo absolute value yet? We do not know how to undo absolute value yet. Yep. Okay. So I would have handed this out to you, but if you don't, you can clearly just use the handout or write this down in your notebook. Okay. So we would do this in groups. So maybe we would do breakout rooms, or maybe I'll assign you people to get in touch with to do this. But we normally do this in class. So I want you to answer all three questions, 1, 2, and 3. For A, B, C, and D. Okay. All of these, we're going to find the values that make each equation true. And I will tell you that in this case, there are two numbers. You have to find the two numbers that make both equations, that make each equation true. So two different numbers here, two different numbers here, two different numbers there, two different numbers there. And then what you're going to find hard is there a way to find the two solutions to these equations? So is there a way we can take what we're given and find the two answers? Can we take what we're given and find the two answers? Can we take what we're given? Can we find the two answers? And can you take what we're given and can you find the two answers? Okay? Is the way to do it, because if we can find an organized way, we might be able to answer number 3, which is how do we undo the absolute value symbol? Okay? So I would have you turn in groups, and everyone would get started for about 15 minutes. And some students everyone can do 1. So go ahead and do that. When you're done with number 1 for all of them, try to do number 2. Right? And I'll walk around and check in with you. This might be in groups, right? And then the question is, how do we undo absolute value? So now's a good time to pause and just try it. But I'm going to keep going for video purposes. Ready? Okay. So what did everyone get for the first one? And students would say x could equal 8. And I would say, everyone agree that 8 plus 2's absolute value is 10? And they say yes. And I would ask for another one. And the students would say negative 12. And that would be great. And I would say why? And they would say negative 12 plus 2 is negative 10. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. All right, how about B? What minus 1's absolute value is 8? I said it, obviously. The x could be 9, because 9 minus 1 is 8, and the absolute value of 8 is 8. But this has another answer. Did anyone figure out the other answer that works? And that's right, x could be negative 7. Sweet. Then we go to this one, which students sometimes find easy. So what could x be? And students say 4. Or x could also be negative 4, right? And how about this one? 10 minus x absolute value is 3, so someone found 7, obviously. And did anyone think of another one that it could be besides 7? Yeah, we can get 13. Sweet, so x could equal 7, or x could equal 13. All right, so everyone usually gets those answers. And I do like to get you to try to pull it out. So the question is, what is an organized way to find the 2 solutions to these equations? And students really struggle, but I think it's worth struggling. Well, let's think about this. Can we use what we're given in the equation to get the 2 answers? Can we use what's in the equation to get the 2 answers? Can we use what's in the equation to get the 2 answers? Can we use what's in the equations to get the 2 answers? Right? And the answer is yes, sort of, right? Like, I would go here, how can you get 8? One group always figures this out. Well, you can find 8 by just solving this equation. Take x plus 2 equals 10, take away 2, you get x equals 8. So solve it like normal, you're saying? Well, let's look at B. If we solve this like normal, forget the absolute value, do we get one of the answers? Yeah, we did. And what about over here? If we don't think about the absolute value, do we get one of the answers? Yes, we do, right? This one's tricky, but it still works. Takes one extra step. Yeah, so if we just solve this like normal, we get one of the answers. And that's the trick to undoing absolute value, or at least half of it. So we can find one solution by just doing what we normally have been doing. That's sweet, right? Okay. Now we're trying to think a little bit more about how do we find the other solution, right? Can you use 2 and 10 in some way to get negative 12? Can we use 1 and 8 in some way? Or 1 and 8 to get negative 1 and 8 to get negative 7 somehow? Or 2 and 8 to get negative 4? Or 10 and 3 to get 13, right? This one gets a little trickier, right? But let's take 2 and 10. How's a way to use 2 and 10 to get negative? And someone said, well, you can add these and then make it negative, right? So 2 plus 10 is 2 plus 10 is 12, and make it negative, negative 12. Right? And here, well, this would be, we need to undo it, so maybe divide by 2 and make it negative. Oh, that works there. What about this? If we add these two and then make our answer negative, no. What if we, no, if we, I don't know, that's kind of weird. How about here? All right, so that's what makes it tricky, but I think we can get there. Take a look at this one. It's okay if what's in this parenthesis, in this absolute value, are we okay if this is 8 or negative 8, this outcome? Sorry. Are we okay if the absolute value of 2x becomes 8 or negative 8? And the answer is yes. The absolute value of 8 is 8, and the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Okay, so we can accept both the negative and positive 8 in the absolute value. So that's what we're going to do. So, blah, 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 blah. And we're probably running a little long in this video, but that's okay. So, I don't know why I didn't have that there. And let's take another piece of paper. Okay, so let's take a look at our equation here. So take a moment, write this down. So how do we solve absolute value equations? Well, in all those cases, we had 2 answers, remember? 2 answers. So to get 2 answers, we sort of need, wait, this is supposed to be 10, I think. Yeah, this is supposed to be 10. Oops. Well, how do we solve it, right? And I don't want to give it away, but one way, right, is just treat it like a regular equation. And that's how you find one of the solutions. You just treat it like a regular equation. Forget the absolute value, just solve it, and you do get 8. And 8's one of the answers you found. The question is, how do we get the other one, right? And this part's always a little trickier for students to get. But we actually need a different equation. We know one of the answers is negative 12. You've all found it. How do we get it, though, right? Well, negative 12 works because it makes this answer. Why does negative 12 work in here? Because negative 12 plus 10 plus 2 equals negative 10. Right? And the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So here is our second one. And because we need 2 answers, we kind of need 2 equations to get them. And that's the trick. We need both a positive and negative answer to give us the equations. Okay? And so I just want you to practice that step today. That's our new step. This is how you undo. I'll write that down. You undo absolute value symbol by splitting into 2 equations. Now you can see why we left it to 8th grade, right? We got all the other operations undone, and we are going to talk about other operations. We're saving it until you understand more, but to undo absolute value, you need to split into 2 equations, okay? So really quickly here, we got one more, let's see. Okay, so here we go. We want to find the answer that makes this true. Because we have absolute value first, we're going to split it into two equations. The first one is what everyone said. You just solve the normal equation. So solve normal. The other equation, we still use the same inside. And what's the one difference with this other one? We're okay with this becoming 10, or what else could it become? Because the absolute value of negative 10, boom, we got it. And then we just solve like normal, right? So we get 2. That's how you undo absolute value. Right? Notice that it's been dropped. We would solve these, but I'm not as interested. You know how to solve these at this point. I'm just going to show you another example. Okay, take a moment and write down B. Okay, pause if you need more time. So we have a slightly more complicated equation, but we're still going to try to solve this for x. Now, what should we do first, do you think? All right, I'm going to help. We have absolute value to undo, we have subtraction to undo, and we have addition to undo. Which one do you think we should do first? Well, just like if this was parentheses, which they are symbol or grouping symbols, we're going to get rid of this plus 4 first. Yeah, so we'll get rid of the plus 4. Now we have the absolute value of x minus 1 equal to 4. Okay. So this is what we want to do. We want to get absolute value by itself on one side. So just like you try to get x, you need to get absolute value by itself on one side before undoing it. Okay? All right, now we can undo it. So here's where to ask, what are the 2 equations we need to get to undo this? And everyone's going to say the normal one, right? X minus 1 equals 4. And then the changed one, right, is going to be x minus 1 equals, because we're okay with this becoming 4, or negative 4, sick. Okay, so those are our 2 equations. And that's how we solve, okay? And we'll skip that one for now. So, classwork, and this was a long one, to finish for homework is go to page 57. And I have the problems right here. We're going to do numbers 1 through 6. The answers are here, so I'm not interested in as much in the answers. I'm interested in you solving the equations, right? And showing me how you got your answer. Okay? So you won't get credit if you submit it with just the answers, because answers are there. Okay? So make sure you show your work, split them, right? Get absolute value alone and split them. So that is the recording for Monday. Oh, and we are going to have a test on Friday of this week. So I'll keep reminding you, but we are done with chapter 1. We're going to spend the time reviewing this week, finishing up stuff, and then we have our test on Friday. Okay, everybody?